Four.
Good morning and or afternoon or evening. I keep saying good morning because it's morning when we get started, but whatever time it is, wherever you are, thank you for tuning in with us. Today I am live and on location from beautiful Colonial Williamsburg, and my esteemed colleague Michael Ray is live and on location from beautiful Somerset, Kentucky. How's everything, Michael?
Do you feel like you're doing it just like the Patriots did it? Just like the colonists? This how they did podcasts?
Yes, I think this is how they would have done it. Maybe with a fire in the background, some cast iron skillets.
James Madison, this is how he would have podcast. I'm almost certain.
Thomas Jefferson just down the street from his guest bedroom. I'm sure. Why not? We are continuing on in our series this morning, and thank you again for tuning in with us as we go through this idea of Christians at work and how we can answer maybe some difficult questions or some struggles or some things that we come across. As I'll give our full disclaimer, we are by no means experts in any of this stuff. We're just two guys that have been working for a while that have run into some of these problems. And so what we're trying to do is give you some solutions and some Bible answers and some ways that you can look at, how do you navigate this stuff when it comes up? How do you make decisions? How do you run into these problems? And, we're hoping we can give you some scriptural answers and some guidance that will help you along your path as you're choosing that. And so, Michael, where does that take our org chart to today? Where do we find ourselves around the C-suite or building, if you will?
Well, Mike, as you remember, for those who are on the video version of this award-winning production, we've shown this slide a time or two. Our thoughts are kind of centered around Colossians 3:23 and 24. Whatever you do, work at it with enthusiasm as to the Lord and not for people, because you know that you will receive your inheritance from the Lord as the reward. And with that thought in mind, and I also might add to that, the sister passage there is Ephesians 6:6-8, where it talks about doing the work, not only when someone is watching as people pleasers, but as slaves doing the will of God from the heart. And we kind of touched on that verse a little bit. If I told you that you're going to be doing the will of God from the heart or doing the will of God from the soul, you'd be assuming I would be talking about a deeply spiritual thing. In context, Paul was writing to the Ephesians about their work lives. And so how we act and how we interact and what we do at work is deeply important to our Christian lives and our Christian walks. And it makes sense. We spend a lot of our day there, right? And so we've taken this project of trying to look at different departments within the typical business and talk about some of the unique challenges and responsibilities if you work in that department. And so we took a swing at some of the issues that exist in the sales department and the accounting department. But today we're going to tackle or attempt to tackle some of the issues that face the human resources department. And that is, Mike, that should affect a lot of our Christian interactions, because human resources deal with people, and it just so happens that Christianity also deals with people, and our interactions with people are critical to our Christian walk, and obviously they're the interactions between and among people are critical to business, and so we should expect there to be some overlap here, and I think there definitely is.
Yeah, and so for those of you who have been along for a couple of these so far,
God bless you, first of all.
Yes, and
appreciate your patience.
Appreciate your patience. The first two that we keyed up are, of course, kind of our wheelhouse. I'm the sales guy, Michael's the accountant, and so that format there was, Michael kind of peppered me with questions in sales, and I peppered him with questions in accounting. Neither one of us have worked in HR. Both of us have, generally tried to stay out of the HR office, quite honestly. So what we're going to try to do today is kind of a balance of what we did before. Michael's got some questions, I've got some questions, and we're just going to try to ping pong these things back and forth. and hopefully get to some answers that are helpful. So that's going to be our format for today, and probably moving forward, since neither one of us have been in IT or production. Well, you can lightly say what we've done is production, but most of our stuff has been in the other areas of the org chart. So we're going to try that a little bit this morning. If it works, we'll keep doing it. If it doesn't, we'll scrap it and try something else. So Michael, let's since you were ahead of the curve in preparation, which you always are, that good, like a good accountant. Why don't you start first, and then I'll fire back on the other side.
Well, I'll start with the question that I think is involved in a lot of different departments, but it may hit specifically here in HR. We actually talked about this in collection of receivables also. But there's this natural tension, I think, for the Christian, particularly in this HR department, about balancing grace and accountability. And so I'm talking here about employee discipline, I guess primarily. And at times, employees, they are not performing as they are expected to perform. And when that happens, if you happen to be in an HR role or in a managerial role dealing with HR issues, you've got a difficult situation to balance, because as a Christian, we are called to grace, right? We've been extended grace, and we are expected to extend grace. Blessed are the merciful. At the same time, business principles demand some accountability, and business would say you're only as strong as your weakest link, and you're familiar with all those kind of cliches, and so from a business perspective, sometimes people have to be demoted, sometimes people have to be fired, and obviously you get into some of the same issues in talking about church discipline, but it is a little, in my mind, it's a little more difficult. We're talking about something that's not sinful necessarily, it's just not productive. Right. And so how do you handle that situation with an employee who is not performing to expectations, and how do you balance the expectations for grace and accountability in that relationship?
Well, I'm convinced that the business principle and the principle within the church are one and the same. And that is really, you coach them up or you coach them out. And when we talk about that, as a Christian, we understand and grace and mercy, and we look forward to that. But we also very clearly understand that there's going to be judgment and there's going to be justice. We're going to have to give an account ultimately of the things that we've done and the things that we've left undone. That accounting is coming at the end of our lives. Jesus talks about there in Matthew that we'll give an account for every careless word that we utter. So we understand that that's coming. And while grace and mercy and love are a large part of it, the difficulty is so is justice. And I think because in our own lives we try to delay justice, and we absolutely don't want justice. In my life, I don't want justice. Absolutely not. And anybody that understands scriptures knows what we deserve and what justice is. We want grace and we want mercy, but by the same time, we understand that at some point justice does come, and I think that happens in the workplace as well. But I also think it's important within the workplace to understand roles and responsibility. Because you're demoted doesn't mean that you're less valuable of an employee. I think we have to create a culture where everybody's valuable. You just, one of the phrases we use at the bank is you just got to be in the right seat on the bus. Doesn't mean you don't belong in the bus, but maybe you shouldn't be driving. Maybe you should be, in the middle of the bus or in the back of the bus. And it's the same thing within the church, right? We all have different gifts. And, whether we're talking about somebody's gift to lead singing or preach, listen, if we got a guy that wants to lead singing every week, but he can't carry a tune in a bucket, at some point, somebody's got to have a conversation to him. Brother, we love you, but you're just not a song leader. You can lead prayer. You can do a lot of other things really, really good, but song leading just isn't your thing. And I think that's, in the workplace, if you do it right, if you do it with love, if you do it with their best interest in mind, we can move them around. And sometimes the hard conversation, and I've had a few of these with employees of mine, is that the best thing for you to do is not work here. This just isn't your gig. It doesn't make you a bad person, but not everybody's built for sales, and not everybody's built for face to face or business to business sales. It's a rough gig, and it's just like, also, think about people in the accounting department. Listen, if you can't do basic math, you probably can't be in the accounting department, right? We love you, but you can't count. So we're going to have to move you somewhere else. Kind of a funny story. A couple of weeks ago, I was on the bank is involved with Eastern Kentucky University in their athletic programs, and we're a big sponsor and all that. So every Thursday there's a coach's call, and the coach kind of talks about team they're playing coming up and who they played and how the team's doing and all that jazz, right? So that's the background. Coach gets on there and they're asking about a specific player, and he said, yeah, we moved him over to defensive back. We recruited him, we brought him in as receiver. Kid's very athletic, he's a great kid, he's very coachable, knows his stuff, but he can't catch. So it's really hard to play receiver if you can't catch. And he said, so we moved him to defensive back, and that way his drop is a pass breakup. So it's a win for everybody. So, while we're kind of sitting there laughing, I think that principle is exactly right. Like, look, if you can't catch, you can't be a receiver. If you can't count, you can't be in the accounting department. If you can't sell, you can't be in the sales department. That's okay. That doesn't make you a bad person. There's other qualities that you have that are fabulous. Let's just figure out where you're going to be the best, because truth be told, that person who's underperforming in whatever department they're in, they're also miserable, because nobody likes to be the worst person at what they do. Nobody likes to come in every day and do a bad job. I mean, I don't believe that. Maybe there's somebody out there that'll prove me wrong, but I think if you come in and you do a bad job and the quality of your work isn't good and you're not getting any better, I think you're miserable. You're just as miserable as your boss is. So let's figure that out. And I think that's the grace and the mercy solution. And also the grace and mercy solution sometimes is, look, it's just in your gig, you shouldn't work here. Let's help you find out what you're good at and move you over to someplace where you're going to be more successful. So that's how I would deal with it. I'll throw it back at you just a little bit. Any thoughts there? Anything that you've done or seen done that's a little different?
I would just dovetail off a couple of things you said there. Number one, in the experiences where demotion or termination was necessary and that I've been involved in, almost uniformly, the person was almost relieved, because as you noted, the job performance is not lost on them. They understand, again, almost uniformly, they understand that they're not performing at the right level, and despite coaching and opportunities and it's just, as you said, it's not the right fit, and that in most cases that employee knows that. At least it's been my experience, and so understanding that helps me. I'm an enormous squish, as you know, and so I am not and actively avoid confrontation whenever possible. And so these are my least favorite conversations in the workplace. But there's some comfort in knowing that this is never out of the blue. And by the way, it should never be out of the blue. If we believe in any kind of grace and to your point, justice, this has to be after a long series of conversations, I think, for sure. And honest, transparent conversations about job performance and evaluations, right? And I think that should be understood. I would also add that I think that Christian managers should be more graceful, and then that I don't think there should be any surprise about that. They should, you probably should get one more chance with a Christian manager than you do with a non-Christian. At least in my judgment, I think that because there is a background of grace and forgiveness there, that's understood. But at the same time, the business environment demands that the culture, if you've got a good culture, even a culture that's built on second and third chances, at some point, tolerating someone who's defiantly or just blatantly underperforming is corrosive. And so the balance is really, in a lot of ways, the responsibility to that individual and the responsibility to the rest of the team. And that's got to be considered. That's got to be considered also. I know that when we've had these conversations privately in the past, and you have, coached me to go ahead and have the conversation against my my nature. The fact is, at some point, it has become so. The well has become so poisoned in the current position among the coworkers and in the department that it's better for the individual. That's the loving thing. It's in the best interest of the individual. It's the agape thing for the individual to move on to something else. And so you gotta kind of prayerfully take that into consideration. And we haven't mentioned prayer here, but I don't know why you would tackle any of these conversations without understanding that's important, and that you are dealing with somebody's life, and take it seriously and pray about
it. The only other thing I'll add is I was thinking about this too, is that so we're dealing with, and I answered the question, I think you answered the question the same way, with performance issues, underperformance. But we all do understand there are some non-negotiables that we've got to walk you off the job for, right? When we're talking about the quota's X and you're coming in minus X, that's a coaching thing. We can try to coach you up. We can try to make you better performance-wise. If you try to burn down the company, we're going to have to walk you out that day.
Sure.
If you just
theft,
like, a preacher, theft, embezzlement, just like a preacher from the pulpit just espouses false doctrine, we're going to stop him. We're not going to let him finish the sermon. You get up there and start saying some nonsense, and there's certain things that are destructive and have to be dealt with immediately and swiftly. So I think everybody should understand that, but I just want to throw that in there, that there are, we're not talking about, all right, you've stolen from us 3 times, we'll give you one more. We're not doing that, right? There's that type of thing's not working out. And we wouldn't do that in the church environment. And there's certain things, again, that, you play with that, even with God. I mean, we look at the Old Testament, God gives them a lot of rope, but you cross a certain line and, here come the Babylonians.
The Bible principle, the text that I would refer to, at least I think about here, Colossians 4, verse 1, masters, treat your servants justly and fairly, knowing that you also have a master in heaven. And so I think that kind of golden rule principle, that we would want to be treated justly and fairly. And so we gotta keep that in mind in those interactions. So.
Okay. Let me pivot a little bit, but stay in the same world. So Michael, how do you, with the same idea of grace and mercy and dealing justly with your employees, how do you balance the budget and bottom line needs of the business? Right. Neither one of us are working for nonprofits. Okay. So there has to be a profit, with the needs of the family, so how do you come up with what are appropriate wages for certain jobs? What's the appropriate employee benefit cost to pay? What happens when the work isn't there and you need to diminish the workforce? It's not necessarily a you're underperforming thing. It's, look, we were doing X in production and business is falling off by 25%, so we need to reduce the workforce by 10. So how do you balance all of that in the same idea and world of grace and mercy?
So, unfortunately, I don't like a lot of these things. I don't think there's a prescription. There is not a biblically mandated minimum wage. There's not a biblically mandated percentage of employee benefits. We're not going to be able to answer those questions precisely. But like a lot of things, I think that we are designed to struggle with them. I think that we are designed. I think it is designed for us to wrestle with these things. Well, I think we're supposed to wrestle with, is this, again, if that decision is within our purview, I think that we're supposed to wrestle with, is this wage appropriate for this job? There are, again, if we're in that capacity to make those decisions, there are so many verses in both the Old and New Testament that hammer home the idea of do not oppress a worker. And one of the things that the prophets laid on the Old Testament nation of Israel and Judah was what they were doing was they were exploiting workers, or they were withholding wages, or they were not treating their workers fairly. And I think that, again, if we are in a position where we are have something to do with compensation, I think those verses should weigh on us a little bit. Malachi 3:5, there will be judgment on you because you are exploiting workers. Deuteronomy 24:14, don't oppress a lowly and poor servant. Don't pervert justice. Do not withhold wages overnight. Don't withhold. James 5 in the New Testament, the workers are crying out. The pay that's held back from the workers cries out against you. So there's just all of these biblical examples of when a worker is not given fair wages, the owner or the person in HR, whoever's making that decision, there is some accountability there. I think that's important. And just to fall back on, state mandated minimum wage or market whatever, I don't think that is a defense for not taking those verses seriously and prayerfully considering this. So, so that's my biblical answer. My practical answer, just from, and this, feel free to disagree with this. I do believe that Christians in decision-making position here need to take seriously and I think specifically we're talking here about frontline kind of employees, right? That we need to take seriously what is in the world, in the environment that we live in, what is a living wage, and do some study on that and think about that and pray about that. And obviously you can go to some resources and find out what that is and at least get some man's interpretation of what a living wage is. But I think if we are in that position and we are fully aware that a full-time employee is not earning a living wage in our modern environment, I think that's something that we need to be thinking about very seriously, especially when when it is not a death knell to the business if we're not doing that. Again, I'm not saying everybody needs to make $150,000 a year, but I do think that if we have the decision-making authority to do so, that exploiting or I'm not talking about legal. I think there's always a different moral responsibility than a legal responsibility. I think that morally, if we're paying somebody below what is truly substance living, I think there's an issue. That's just me. I'm giving you my position there. That I think we need to be thinking about that and praying about that.
Yeah, I think that should be taken into consideration. I'll give a little bit of a pushback here.
Please.
And it's just that, there's a couple of things that have to be taken into consideration. One, not every position in my mind is a career, right? There are some positions that are entry level. I mean, I don't think you do this either. But I mean, your interns or your part-time people, you're not expecting them on that wage to raise a family,
Sure.
because that's not what that job is designed for. That job is designed to always be temporary. You should be in that job for a little while until you catch a promotion. So I think that's part of it. But the other thing too is we also have to be honest with the margin, right? If we're making, $1 of gross revenue off of our product, there's a dollar's got to go around, and if the lights cost this and the cost of goods is that, you start chopping that up. You can't give 50 cents of every dollar that the company makes on the gross top line. Again, I don't want to go back to our accounting class here, but the top line gross revenue, we can't give 50 cents to the guy that's loading the boxes. It's just, there's an economics part to it too, I guess is what I'm saying here. That, as much as you hear, people, and it's a hot button issue today, clamor about, workers' rights and what's a fair wage and all that. I definitely understand that, but there's also an economics piece to it too, that, if you continue to raise the, there's just law of unintended consequences, right? If the guy that is the, entry level worker, the more we increase his cost to the company, the more we increase his pay, the more we've got to increase the product. So he can't afford the product either. And I think one thing that I would point to in the history of economics is the fact that, for years when Ford and GM started, the goal was that their employees that were building the cars would drive the cars, right? That you had an embedded market here. You would build the car, you would buy the car, you would drive the car. But there came a point when the cost of those employees got so much, they had to raise the price of the car so much that your average employee couldn't buy a brand new truck, because you're making $30,000 a year and the truck's now 90 because you've got to pay for all these other benefits and things that are promised out there. So, again, that's part of the things that, when you're trying to catch this living wage standard, when inflation kicks in and the cost of the goods that you're trying to get them to purvey is running as fast or faster than you can raise them up in living wage, it becomes a difficult thing to do. So that's the, economics other side argument. However, I do not disagree that absolutely we need to be prayerfully considering, what can we do? What is a fair wage? And, that's got to be part of the question too of, do we need to have a certain number of our workforce because that's all we can afford to pay? Because look, we think we can hire another guy at X, but, really Y is living. So we're going to need to do it with 80% or 90% of the workforce of our peers, of our peer group, of our industry, because of that. And is that higher wage? Does that get you a better quality worker? Can you offset some of that everybody's going to have to work 10% harder than they would if they were down the street at company? Again, I don't want to get too far down that tangent, but there's just a lot to consider there. It's not always as easy as they make it sound on a picket line.
I don't have any idea what the level is where a worker is exploited, and I'm certainly not going to try to throw out a number or make a judgment on that. And I would think, you would both agree that number is vastly different in different environments across the globe. But I would only say that there is a number where a worker is being exploited. There is a number where we are withholding wages, in my judgment, and I don't think that number has anything to do with what the state mandated minimum wage is. And so and I'm not saying it's higher or lower. I'm just saying that it would be absurd to think that the state is going to make that decision on behalf of the Christian business owner. That would be, that's right. So I think we all have to think about those questions seriously. The other part of the question that you asked was, does sometimes you have to lay off employees, and that's painful and difficult. But it's one of those places where the economic reality and our ideals come into conflict. Ideally, we would want somebody that works hard to never have to have that issue, right? But the economic realities is sometimes that happens. I would only say that if we are a Christian in those decision making, I hope that the Christians making those decisions, that it is a decision of last resort, and that it is that's not ever taken lightly, and that there is some prayerful accommodation that tries to make a painful process as pain, to ease it somewhat in some manner. Whether that is some kind of severance or whether that is some kind of job plate replacement, kind of whatever. There's things that you can do if you care about it and you think about it. So I do think that a casual dismissal of the workforce is a problem. Because if you are in these HR kind of decisions, every one of these decisions involves somebody's life and ultimately involves somebody's family and somebody's soul. And so just to think about it, any of them casually or just from an economics perspective is dangerous.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna kind of add in what unfortunately, friends, I get a lot of times from my conversations with Michael Ray when we're debating very difficult issues. That this is his, I think, go-to line is, as long as you're struggling with it, you're on the right path. And I think that's right. You know, there's a lot of that there's not a rock solid concrete answer. But I think if you're in Romans 7, you know, I do the things that I don't want to do, and I don't do the things that I want to do. A wretched man that I am, but grace, thanks be to God that there's grace. If that's the kind of inner conflict you have, I think that's healthy. I think that's good. I think that's, you know, that's how you know you're on the right path. If you laid off 25% of your workforce and you sleep like a baby tonight, I don't know you did it right. That's all I'm going to say about that. I don't know that you did it right.
Well said. Okay, my friend. Here's one that is, I don't know. Hope it's not too hyper relevant. We're not trying to follow the news cycle here, but I think it is maybe something that we think about in HR. We read a lot about in HR. Is, do businesses have a scriptural? Do businesses have a moral obligation for diversity in the workforce?
So, you know, the scriptural, the moral, you know, I don't know that I ever see that laid out, you know, other than there's scriptures that talk about, you know, taking care of the stranger and the foreigner as they come in. So you've got some of that in the Old Testament. You've got, you know, in Galatians, you know, we see that we're all the same. It doesn't matter, slave or free, Greek, Jew, you know, that God sees us all as exactly the same. So, you know, it's interesting to try to talk about diversity when God says, I see all you guys the same. So I think that's an interesting idea too, is that should we look at it as diversity, or should we look at it that everybody's exactly the same? It's, you know, it's not that issue. I think sometimes, you know, we get caught down this path of, you know, wanting to, you know, and you hear about this in business that there's these token seats. You're not really hiring talent. It's, you know, hey, we need a woman or we need somebody with a certain ethnicity to check a box, but it becomes a puppet position as opposed to, you know, real leadership. Here's, I told you I went down the wishing well. Here's what I think we should do. In First Kings chapter 5, really through chapter 9, you have the building of the temple of God. You know, so some of you are kind of familiar with that story. Here's what I find that's interesting when God is building his house, or Solomon's really the GC, if you will, for building the house of the Lord. You know what they did? They went and got the best people for every position. And you know what? Those people weren't Jews. They went and got the timbersmen that cut and mold from Laban. They went and brought in bronze workers from Tyre and Sidon, which, again, if you read a little bit later in your minor prophets, are horrible people that God ends up wiping out. So you see over and over and over in 1 Kings 5 through 10 that when God built his house, he went and got the best people for the job. And it didn't matter whether they were Jews or Greeks or slaves or free, he went and got them. And Solomon and his wisdom made sure that they were all fairly compensated. And as he talked to the king of Tyre and the king of these other places, you know, they worked out and negotiated what the fair wage was for his workers that he sent, for the materials that they procured. But I found that just really, really interesting in looking at this, as, you know, you would think, you know, if, again, a casual student of your Old Testament history is, no, God would have just used the best in the tribes of Israel, right? He would have had those of, you know, Gad and Asher and Ephraim, like those would be who we would pick from. No, he didn't. Because they had, you know, peace for the first time in a long time, and Solomon had relationships all around, what God did was what was best, is use the best people for the job. I think that's what we have to do. regardless of what that person looks like, whether they're, black or white or Hispanic or male or female or all of that. To me, it's the best person for the job every time. And what you get when you look for the best person for the job and you look, all over the place for the best person for the job, what you find is that that best person probably doesn't, look like you, because if they look like you and thought like you would do the job. But what we need is somebody to balance that, right? We need outside ideas. It's, to kind of tell, on us a little bit, in Michael's business, I know enough really to be dangerous, and distribution, middle market, C-store, all that stuff. I know enough to be dangerous. But it's interesting how many times him and I have conversations where I'm just the outside guy that he's throwing a problem at. I'm like, hey, did you think about this? Just think about that. That's kind of what we do here where I'm at. And the same thing, when I bring him problems or issues, kind of how would you handle that? Because he's not working in a bank, hadn't worked in a bank, hadn't done those things. But it's that outside mind, that outside look, that outside ideology that can help us solve a lot of these problems. And when you bring in people that are really good at what they do, really good graphic designers or really good accountants or really good salespeople, or whatever your project is, to me, we shouldn't worry so much about what they look like, but more what they bring to the table. And if we do that, I think they're all going to look different because of where their specialties lie. So kind of long-winded answer to that, but I think that's part of it, is that we find the best people, for the job. Here's another caveat I'm going to throw on the back of that. So there's 168 hours in a week, 24/7. If you back out the, 8 hours a day we all sleep, then 35% of our week, so a little bit better than a third of our week, is at work. Okay. That's a big chunk. And out of that big chunk, do we want to spend that with sinners, to use the Pharisees' words? Do we want to spend that with people that don't look like us, that we might have some influence on? Or do we want to try to, surround ourselves in a bubble where we don't have as much influence? I think sometimes as Christians, we have these, Pharisaical ideas that, we should only be surrounded by other Christians. Well, while there's some benefit to that, if all we're around is Christians, who are we going to convert? How are we going to expand the borders of the kingdom? How are we going to have influence on the world if all we do is hire us? If all we do is stay in our same, bubble here? I think if we're going to spend a third of our lives around these people, and a third of our lives for, the next 40 or 50 years, depending on how old you are right now, I think we've got to have the opportunity to influence them for good. We've got to have, and I'm not saying that, the workplace we should hire for the purpose of converting. Please don't misunderstand me. I think we should hire in the workplace. I think we should hire the best person for the job, regardless of what their background is. Secondly, I think that, we should have influence on those that are around us. We should be salt and light. And if we as Christian business owners can't, through what we're trying to do, through what we're implementing, through our practices, through our policies, through our procedures, if we're not reflecting God, if we're not an influence for the kingdom in their lives, I think we might be doing something wrong.
I'm going to put a pin in the question of, should Christianity be a differentiator in the hiring process? Because we are going to talk about that, because I think it's an interesting question. And I might have a rebuttal to one of your comments there, but I'm going to put a pin in that for a minute. On the issue of diversity, I think that we basically would agree that I'm not sure Christianity or diversity is a Christian mandate, but it might be a result of Christian principles. And I think as long as we think about what diversity correctly is, just a diversity of backgrounds and a diversity of opinions. I think that is more important to true kind of progress at least as I would judge it. Remember, I think about that as much as your example from the book of First Kings is well taken. When Jesus was putting together his team, it was all male Jews of a pretty tight age range from Galilee. There was not, as far as geographic or racial diversity, there wasn't a lot of it. There was a lot of diversity of background and thought. There was the Simon the Zealot and Matthew the tax collector, which in 2020 politics, I mean, there was MAGA and Black Lives Matter on the same team there. And so there was quite a bit of diversity of background and of opinion that all worked together. And so as long as we take seriously stuff like what James says about having no partiality, obviously I think we would agree that, any hint of prejudice or bigotry is just ungodly on its face. And as long as we have that understanding that, to your point, because we believe those things, and prejudice and bigotry are just ungodly on their face, if we are handling our business in a Christian way, I think we end up with some diversity of thought. And I think that is important. I don't, again, is there a mandate of quotas? That might be a business by business decision. And there's a lot of these things that we're going to talk about that or from a business perspective might make sense, and God would be, it's kind of irrelevant to Christianity. They're truly business decisions that don't have an impact one way or other. And that this may be one of those things also. So good conversation. So I'm going to go back to this question that you brought up about trying to surround ourselves with the ungodly. At least that's how I'm going to redefine your position. So in the HR process, in the hiring process, looking for people to interview in the recruitment process, should Christianity or morality be a factor?
So here's how I'm going to answer that. Morality, yes. Christianity, maybe. Anybody that we hire, especially in sensitive type positions, right? I don't want somebody that's been a crook their whole life in the accounting department. I don't want somebody that has a history of lying or cheating or stealing, filling out expense reports, right? I mean, there's certain things like that you want to try to narrow down. You don't want to put them in positions to where the company's at risk or they themselves are at risk. So let's understand that a little bit. So I think, from a moral standpoint, you always want to try to hire, for lack of a better term, quote unquote, good people. I want a good person. I think Cornelius was a good person. He wasn't a Christian. He was a good person though. It's good to be around. And others that, we can grab throughout, the Ethiopian eunuch. He's a good dude, but he didn't know what he was reading, and led himself there. So there are good people with good hearts, people that are, good intentioned, that are also, candidates for the gospel. I think so. Good people, but maybe they're not Christians. And so I would kind of, be in that line, in that vein. Christians, you would also assume, and sometimes maybe we do this incorrectly, but sometimes we assume that the Christian's the best thing for the job because he's going to come in or she's going to come in and they're going to work hard and they're going to do a good job because, they're a Christian. Well, there's Christians that maybe their faith isn't good enough or they haven't spent enough time in the Word, that they're not up to date on these principles. And, it's also a rough thing in the workplace when you hire a Christian, when you hire somebody maybe you've gone to church with, and they're worked under the table by a heathen, right? That makes it very kind of difficult in the workplace too, right? So again, I'm going to fall back to you hire the best person for the job, and you try to hire good people, and those that aren't Christians, you hope that you have enough influence on their lives that you can, show them God, show them Jesus, and let them make a decision.
Your question, counselor.
Let me slide back here. All right. So, all right. We're getting close on time, so I'll leave you with let's just try to back you into a corner here, since you said I surround myself with sinners. Uh,
You said it. I
listen,
don't know what I said.
listen. Jesus was accused of the same thing, so I'm okay with your accusations. So how do you do this? How do you deal with highly productive employees? Um, ones that are just really good. They're rock stars, but they're terribly immoral. I mean, they cuss, drink, fuss, fight, but man, if their numbers, when you stack rank them, they are, they're carrying the company in a lot of ways, but they're not great people. Maybe they got hired before we put in the good person quota, but so what do you do with those? I mean, how do you deal with that when they're really, really good on the business side and not great on the spiritual side?
I thought about this a little bit when you warned me this question was coming, and I think this may be my shortest answer of the whole. This may be my shortest answer of the whole series. Is my hope would be that if we got any position of authority in our business, that we can create an environment so uncomfortable for that person that they decide that it's not for them. And I genuinely believe that.
So let's I'm gonna press on this, okay?
Please.
So number one sales guy at your shop leads far and away, is responsible for some stupid number of the business, 25% of your overall business, based on his relationships. And if he goes across the street, he's taking some of those relationships with him. Big relationships, maybe. You still want to run them off? Truth serum here. You still want to run them off?
I hope that the culture runs him off. I'm not saying we would fire him. I don't know that we would have that kind of guts, right? I doubt that we would. But my real answer is, over time, I think the culture runs them off. And I think that the company is better off because of it. That if we genuinely have a culture that's built on Christian principles, and by the way, I think we should. I think that's what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
That somebody who is genuinely, truly, morally corrupt is there's going to bristle at all that. It's going to create friction, and it's going to correct itself one or two ways. Either it's going to the friction is going to grind on them until they make some changes, which happens,
Mm-hmm.
or it's going to drive them away. And I think that the short-term view of that or taking a short-term view that's devastating, is the germ of everything that's wrong with modern business. that is a short-term, what is this quarter's year-over-year revenue, rather than taking a 10-year picture of all decisions. That's my genuine answer.
Spoken like a non-publicly traded company.
Absolutely. Happily. And I'm a little on the Warren Buffett theory. I wish they would do earnings releases once every 5 years. I think we'd all be much better off. But genuinely, I mean, that is, is it short-term or long-term thinking? And I think there's Christian principles behind long-term thinking, that in the long term, it's going to be better for the business.
And here's the thing, this is absolutely a loaded question, because my thing is, I don't think that person exists, because it's somebody that's completely morally bankrupt is also going to bend rules, right? That person is not going to live in the fully ethical area. If you're morally bankrupt, if you'll do anything and are, riddled with immorality throughout the rest of your life, you're going to fudge an expense report. You're going to, mislead some clients in sales. You're not going to be fully above board. all of those things are gonna manifest in those ways. Um, you know, typically what you have, quite honestly, and from the sales back, kind of as a sales manager had, when I have those conversations with my boss, look, there's a certain amount of that we're going to allow because of the production. If you're producing at a very, very high level, we're going to let you mess up some stuff because we think it's worth it. We're just going to let you get away with it. If you add, your pad and expense reports or whatnot, even if I catch you, Mike, their production's X, pull that off of their production. They're still profitable to us. So we're going to keep going. So if you're in a publicly traded company where you're, having to report to shareholders on a quarterly basis, they're going to deal with that. I think when you are in control and we're in our, mythical Christian run business where we're not reporting to shareholders all the time, I think you can be far more prescriptive in that stuff. I think you can advance the culture enough to make them uncomfortable. But I think that's, maybe you get to a bend or break thing there. Maybe what happens is they start coming around the other way and see that, hey, I kind of like this, this is different. And maybe they're saying 150 cuss words when they first start, but a year later they're down to like 10. So maybe you start to see that growth too. I don't know. I've seen that. Interestingly, on my team of guys that work around me, and I've got in my business, for whatever reason, in sales, especially when you're on commission and sales, a lot of drinking, gambling, cussing, immorality. It's just kind of part of the deal or whatever. But it's interesting when they're around me, when they're in my office, I find them biting their tongue, breaking it off. And a lot of reasons, oh, you're a preacher, I can't be cussing in front of you. I'm like, no, you shouldn't cuss in front of me because you shouldn't cuss. Whether I'm a preacher or not doesn't have anything to do with it. But, but I kind of see that influence in those small ways. If the whole corporate culture was that way, to me, I think it would have a big impact. I mean, I just can't imagine you got a lot of people running around driving the F-bomb in the C-suite at Modern, right? I can't imagine that that's something that would go on without getting a lot of raised eyebrows, right?
I think good cultures, I mean, we've experienced it a little bit and we're far from perfect. I don't want that, by the way.
Right.
But
no.
I think I've seen in Christian cultures, whether observing or being in them, culture just chews that stuff up and spits them out. And it is self-selecting. And it builds on itself because of that. And I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think that tolerating or turning a blind eye or, oh, he's still productive, man, I just think that's corrosive. I do. And I'd be hesitant about just tolerating it.
We are, I've got almost 8:30, so we are out of time. And I'm sure there's not many people that are still listening at this point, unless you're listening for the second or third time and you've just paused it every time you've gotten out of the car. But for those of you who are still here to the end, we appreciate you a bunch. Thank you for tuning in with us. Next week, we're going to pick up, we've still got a couple more questions. We may pick this up a little bit too next week as we try to navigate through a lot of this stuff. HR seems to be just a place where a lot of these ideologies get caught. So I think it'd probably be worth us spending at least another session here at HR. So again, thank you for tuning in. Hope you have a wonderful day wherever you are and whatever you're doing. And hopefully we've given you some things to think about. If you have comments, questions, disagreements, flat out arguments, text us, call us, email us, comment on these. They'll be posted on the internets. So we're happy to respond and see if we can help out along the way.
Fun as always, my friend.
All right. Thank y'all.
God bless.